can welcome everybody. If you can turn off the videos for the presentations, so we are sure that the bandwidth is good. And then for the questions, feel free to open your videos. What we decided is to at first mute you. And when you have the questions, as we start debating, please write them in the chat or raise your hand. If you know Zoom, you can, there is a reaction button on the right that you can raise your hand, and we will call you to ask questions. But because we have lots of people, more than 100, if you can write your question in the chat, would be good, so we can start filtering them. Let me start by thanking those two rock stars attending this webinar. It's for me, it's a immense joy to have them. Just you have in the poster, but I will just say quickly, their careers are stellar and luminar and inspiring. Margit Kivelson is a distinguished research professor at UCLA and a research professor in the University of Michigan. She has multiple degrees from Radcliffe, from Harvard University. I like to learn that her dissertation was not in space physics, but in quantum E&M. And then she left the field, went to be a consultant in the RAND Corporation, and came back to space physics. So this will be an interesting topic. We can discuss what was to come back and etc. She is, we don't need to have introduction. You probably all know her. She has enormous honors. She was elected member of the National Academy of Science, honorary fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, and she's a recipient of the Alpha and Cassini medals, the Fleming Medal, and she contributed from a textbook that we all learn from numerous science and research papers. For people that are joining now, if you can turn on the video, I'm just worried about the bandwidth, at least when we start the presentations. And the other rock star is Nikki Fox, my dear friend, and thank you for attending. She is a heliophysics division director and the science mission directory at NASA headquarters. And she worked in APL before. She was a chief scientist for heliophysics and a project leader scientist for NASA Parker Solar Probe. And you can see all the amazing stuff that she has done to chaperone this mission. She also was a deputy project scientist for Van Allen probes and the operations scientist for the International Solar Terrestrial Physics Program. She comes all the way from England and has her PhD for the Imperial College. And she worked before in NASA Goddard. So anyway, we are very, very honored to have those two rock stars. And just to start the webinar, I wanted to, for folks not aware what is the SHIELD webinar, this is a new center. We are in phase 1, competing with other centers for phase 2. This is part of the DRIVE centers that came as part of the decadal as initiative to have transformative ideas, forming a center from different backgrounds. The PI is myself, the PM is John Richardson from MIT. The vision of SHIELD and the name my students came up with, that is a solar wind with hydrogen ion charge exchange and large scale dynamics. The idea that we, by the end of the life cycle of SHIELD, we will have a predictive model of the heliosphere where we can predict the shielding properties, both in the future, understand the past, and even predict in different directions besides the Voyager 1, Voyager 2, the shielding properties. So we have a huge team. It's a large center that combines observation theory. We have global models and localized models. And the idea behind it that I like this sentence that we use our understanding of the heliosphere as to lay the groundwork for other astrospheres, especially that we know that there are other planets around other stars, but so far our heliosphere is the only habitable astrosphere that we know of. The next webinar will be given by Tom Kremidges and Parisa Mustafavi, and both of them are immigrants like many of you. And we're touching on topics that came from another outreach initiative that we have on gathering different voices in space physics, and these different voices telling important topics that was influential and decisive for their careers. And being an immigrant and coming from faraway lands is important, an important aspect. So we'll be talking with these two fabulous scientists. Okay, if you want to check more of our activities, go to our website. You can just Google Shield BU. It's housed in BU. So you will come to our website. And especially if you're a young scientist and you're listening to this webinar and you said, I want to be part of it, you can reach out. We are gathering testimonials from students and young voices, not especially related to SHIELD. Some are not, on their challenges. And we call it, you can't be what you can't see. And we have all sorts of topics, from what we will discuss today, to being gender fluid, to being immigrant, to be the first generation in a family that doesn't have scientists. You know, not all scientists come from the Ivy League, as wonderful parents that were academics. So what are the challenges coming to space physics? So without further ado, I am going to switch to Margie Kivelson, and then we will open for questions later. Yes, Margie.
I see some old friends. I'm going to share my screen.
Welcome, everybody.
And start the. So
Margie, I can't see. Did you share already? Because I can't see your shared screen yet.
Oh, okay. I thought I had done it. Let me here share.
Sounds great.
I forgot to hit one. There was one button I forgot to hit.
Yes. Okay. Sounds great. Yes.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I look forward to talking to old friends and young scientists. So it'll be fun. I'm showing you in sort of a purpley text the questions that were put to me, and opportunities and choices. And what I'm going to come up with is that my career in space physics, in physics in general, has been really a very happy one. But some of the issues that are of interest to this group, I can say that my role has been good and bad. And so you'll see good and bad coming up a lot. So I was asked about challenges faced as a female and as a mother scientist in a field where there were and still are very few leadership positions. And I can assure you that when I started, there were a lot fewer women around. I was really quite an anomaly. So were there challenges? Everyone faces challenges. Yeah, it was different because I was a woman, but that had its upside and its downside. I don't think I faced obstacles because I was a woman. Everyone faces obstacles. And I did get a lot of attention. I stood out. I mean, here's a 1965 36-member group that I was part of, and you can see I'm the only woman in the group. So everybody knew that I was there. You can sort of take a parallel between me and my husband. We met as freshmen, and so our careers sort of moved together, and he was actually a sophomore. We started 1 year apart, and there were differences. So good and bad, as I said, I was unique in a sea of student faces. My freshman physics class was held in a vast auditorium with 400 men. The 10 women were invited to sit in the front seats, which isn't bad at all. And the professor knew who I was in this sea of faces, and that he was actually quite attentive to me. Daniel was just one of that group of many men in the sea of male faces. So as undergraduates, I think the thing that I envied most was that he had study groups within his house. And so as he was burning the midnight oil and working on his homework, he had people to talk to who were in his class. I was in a dorm where in those days we had to be in by 10 o'clock, and I would get stuck on a problem and there was nobody, let alone there was nobody in my class, there was nobody else in the dorm who knew anything about physics. So good and bad, I had to learn to do it on my own. Bad because I didn't get the boost you get working together. In my first year graduate class, I was one woman with about 60 men. Everybody knew who I was, and I have to say that years later, I would run into people who say, oh yeah, I was in class with you, and I never remembered them, but they all knew me, good and bad. Dan had a career path laid out, degree, academic job, regular promotions. I planned the degree, but I wasn't clear on what came next. Daniel got a faculty position at UCLA. We very reluctantly moved to Los Angeles because we didn't think it was a place we'd want to live in. I got a job because the aerospace industry in the early post-World War II environment was desperate for physicists, and Rand hired me and let me write my own conditions. I got little pay, but they gave me flexible part-time hours, and by this time I had one child, and that the part-time allowed me to take care of my child, but I used my full paycheck to pay caregivers, and they turned out all right. I worked a bit on problems of interest to Rand, and one of the problems they were interested in was the equation of state of hydrogen at megabar pressures. And I know of a couple of places where hydrogen exists at megabar pressures. Rand was thinking about hydrogen bombs, but I discovered that the best work that had been done on hydrogen at megabar pressures was by people who were interested in the center of Jupiter. So way before I ever thought about space physics, I was reading about Jupiter and its interior. I was given a lot of time to work on problems that I just was interested in, and I first used that time to finish my thesis with a lot of encouragement and help from my husband. And thereafter, I started applying, my thesis, as Merov has said, was in quantum electrodynamics. And it was 64 pages of integrals. So I was really interested in the math. I wasn't much interested in the physics. And I discovered that I could use some of the tools that I developed in quantum electrodynamics to understand a problem in plasma physics. We worked out the next order correction to Landau damping over all orders in the coupling constant for those who are interested in details. Well, this was good luck because now I had a paper on plasma physics. I still didn't really have much of a feeling for what a plasma was or where they were, but I knew a lot about the math of plasmas, and I had on my documentation a paper in plasmas, and that helped me get my next job in a field that didn't exist 2 years before Sputnik when I was playing with quantum electrodynamics. So that sort of tells you a little bit about how I got started. Marov asked what opportunities being a female and mother offered me in space physics in terms of different views and a way of being a scientist and a leader. I can't really answer that question, but I can tell you that I had less ambitious expectations of my career than my husband had of his, but that allowed me to take my time and explore different directions, and that is a real opportunity. And I've told you I started in quantum electrodynamics, but because not much was expected of me, I had the freedom to change fields going back to the bottom of the academic ladder to get into space physics and planetary science. I was 10 years post-PhD, and I took what was effectively a glorified postdoc position and started thinking about space physics. I climbed the academic ladder far more slowly than my male colleagues, and always felt that people were doing me a favor by promoting me. And that's not good, but it's real. So as mom and I spent more time with my children, didn't start working until full-time until they were launched in school. And that actually I'm very grateful for. It was an opportunity that most scientists don't have, and I feel very fortunate that I had that. I didn't start going to lots of meetings, which are very important for a scientist. And I didn't start going to a lot of meetings until my children left for college. But boy, have I made up for it since. Anyhow, that was partly good and partly bad. I attracted terrific students, but who knows whether some of them came to me because they liked my being a woman, I don't know, but they were terrific. So my path to a UCLA professorship was circuitous. I told you 10 years post-PhD, I started over again at UCLA. I was assigned to work on space plasmas. I didn't mention that I knew nothing about the subject, so I faked. Students would come to me and talk about particles gradient drifting and conserving mu and j, and I would tell them, come back tomorrow, and I would run up to the library to find out what mu and j were so that I could help them. But I did enjoy working with students, and I taught classes without pay to gain experience because I really did want to be a faculty member. And after 8 years, I was appointed a non-tenured professor, and I was finally, so that's 18 years post-PhD. And I was finally tenured in 1980, 23 years post-PhD. The key steps, I left RAND for a year to become a Radcliffe Institute fellow. Radcliffe Institute was a rather different organization in those days, but it gave me an opportunity to be back in the university, and I just was so much happier there that was sort of what motivated me to leave RAND and go to UCLA. I had a Guggenheim Fellowship and spent a year at Imperial College London, where a lot of the most important theoretical work in space physics was being undertaken, and that really gave me a boost. I was selected as principal investigator for the Galileo magnetometer in 1977, and that certainly was a marvelous experience. And I can't resist showing pictures of, this was the artist's conception. I have another picture. Do you see my cursor? Does my cursor show?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, okay. So this is the artist's conception, and I'll show you another one. The main antenna didn't open, so, but this is the spacecraft at JPL, and there are two magnetometers on an 11-meter boom, and you can see the person working on it gives you an idea of the scale. It was an amazing spacecraft and did wonderful science at Jupiter and at several other places along the way. So by this time, I was launched well enough that I could become an activist for women in academia, and that's been a thread in my career since the early 70s. So let's go back to Mirov's questions. Where did you find your mentors when there were very few and still are few mentors? Well, my mentors were all men, but men can be as great mentors as women. My PhD advisor was equal opportunity and accessible to all 13 of his students, 12 men and me. But his lessons were inspirational, and his brilliant students helped one another learn the material and how to move forward. So I would say my fellow students were among my primary mentors, and they were quite a gang. At UCLA, my boss was Paul Coleman, and he was a generous supporter of our whole research group. He loved starting projects, and as they matured, he lost interest in them and turned them over to his junior colleagues. So he was the one who got me going as a leader of a magnetometry team by letting me lead his magnetometry team on the Pioneer 10 and 11. It was Ed Smith's magnetometer, but Paul was very active in it, and that launched the rest of my career. And I would say he seemed not to notice that I was a woman. Alpha males, that was another question. Confrontation, well, yeah, confrontation can come from females as well. It's likely men get away with more, and I ran into that, but everybody does. In particular, one male colleague took charge of allocating the limited data available from the Galileo mission to Jupiter after the main antenna hadn't employed, and the data rate dropped by at least 3 orders of magnitude. And we were arguing about a few kilobits per second that were left over, and I had requested them so that I could average over a spin in my data. And I think motivated by hostility to me, he allocated those few kilobits per second to another instrument. And it turned out that the restricted data rate meant we were not quite averaging over spin period, and that allowed us to acquire data that we hadn't realized would be extremely useful. It imposed an oscillatory signal at a much longer period that helped us calibrate the instrument. So it turned out that his hostility to me was a boon. So something came out of his denial. And I guess that's another lesson, is that good luck comes in unexpected ways. Merv asked about the imposter syndrome, and I would say yes, 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 and that I expect most of us experience the imposter syndrome. Women may experience it more acutely than men, but it's hard to quantify. So what's useful to know is that it's not just you, it's everybody. So pump up your confidence in yourself by knowing that the insecurity that may overcome you from time to time is experienced by most others. And that includes people who have a facade of enormous self-assurance. did I ever think of leaving the career and what made me stay? No, I never thought of leaving it. I've always loved what I'm doing. I get paid to work with bright young people at a critical stage of their lives. Many of them are still close friends. I have wonderful, clever, interesting colleagues working to help others succeed. I have friends all over the world. What a wonderful career where the people you meet are eager to work with you, not to undermine you. It's a great career. I've never regretted the choice I made to go into science and have a career in academia. So I think it's time to end this. And
Thank you so much, Margie. It's fantastic. While you unshare, there will be lots and lots of time to discuss, I hope. So why we don't switch to Nikki right away with her experience, and then we can, I have an anecdote that I want to tell about the imposter syndrome after Nikki, and then we can open for questions. Yes, you can start typing. If you think about the question, type in the chat, and Rachel will help to select for me. Yes, Nikki, go ahead.
All right. Well, I didn't prepare the wonderful PowerPoint like Margie did, so I'm already feeling imposter syndrome just being here. It's so great. But I was just going to make a few remarks about some, challenges and opportunities and mentors throughout my career. And so, one thing, I went to an all-girls school from the age of 11 to 18. And for me, that was a really, really important thing. I never experienced the gender bias against science and mathematics. And so there was never a sort of a boys do this, girls do the other, because we were all girls and they taught all subjects. And so you were equally able to do that. And I had other friends who were in mixed schools who did not have that impression at all, and they really struggled. I went through, I knew I loved physics. I wanted to do physics. I liked math. I didn't like history, and I thought I still can't find anything on a map. So geography was never my strong point, but I always really liked math and science. And so I knew I wanted to go and study that in college. And when I got first as an undergrad, that was the first time I really hit the idea of imposter syndrome. I came from a very small school where I was always the brightest kid with always the highest marks. And I got thrown into a mix where I was, if lucky, in the middle. And I struggled mightily, and I pretended that I was doing fine. But what I actually did was I kind of disengaged. Because I was worried to ask a question, because I didn't know if people would think I was stupid if I asked a question. And I also had I did have really good tutors, and so I was at Imperial College, but I had one really bad tutor in my second year at Imperial College who was very, very biased against women, and that affected my undergraduate immensely. He would just phrase things like, ask the question and then not look at me and look at the three other men that were in the room with me and say, can one of you clever men tell me the answer? And I was just crushed, and it was really hard to bounce back from that. In my third year, I was really lucky. My tutor was Stan Cowley, who I know Margie knows really well, but any of you who study reconnection in the magnetosphere, you know Stan Cowley, and he did an amazing job of getting my confidence back up and doing there is no such thing as a stupid question, there's only stupid answers kind of idea. And that really sort of got me back on track at that point. But I still wasn't sure that science was for me. So I went off and I did a master's course in telecommunications and satellite engineering, and it was a one-year master's. And at that point, there were 220 people on the combined master's course, and there were 4 women. And so it just like Margie said, everybody knew who we were. And you'd be walking around the town in Guildford and people would come up and talk to you, and you didn't realize that they were actually only a master's course. But I actually had a good experience there, except I was told all the time I asked the wrong kind of questions. And my professors would all tell me, you think like a scientist, not like an engineer. You want to know why, you should be asking how. But you want to know all these extra things, but you're approaching the problems wrong. And so I kept hearing this. So I finished my master's, and then I went back to Imperial College, where I worked with Stan Cowley as my advisor. And I had a number of different advisors as a PhD student. I liked to network a lot, and my thesis I used 10 or 12 different data sets. And this was before you could just Google something. I actually had to handwrite letters to people at different places and introduce myself and kind of build my network. And then they would send me the data, and I would use it in my thesis. So I think that was a very strong thing for me, because I learned about the importance of building a network and building a team. After that, I went to Goddard. I was offered a position, a postdoc at Goddard, and that was one of those things where, I grew up in a small town in Hitchin, in England, where we've never never launched a major mission, hadn't had an astronaut walk on the moon or anything like that. And so it was kind of a pipe dream of working for NASA. So when Jim Slavin walked up to me at a meeting and said, "Could I interest you in a postdoc at NASA?" I felt like somebody was just like asking me if I'd like an Oscar or an Olympic medal or something, because it was just such an amazing experience. So I left my family, left everybody I knew, and moved to America, which I think was one of the bravest things I've ever done. To do that and just have to relocate and totally start again. I didn't even know Jim that well at that point either, and I had to go and really kind of build a whole new life. Imposter syndrome I experienced dramatically when I first got to Goddard. I kept thinking that all the time someone was going to say, "What are you doing here? You're just go home. You shouldn't be in this place." So I really felt that a lot at that point. I did have great mentors, and I agree with Margie that you don't need to have a female mentor. Men can be outstanding mentors to women. And I mean, I've had a lot, but I'll just name a couple that were really instrumental in I think putting me where I am today. And one of those was Bob Hoffman, who many of you will know. He's an ionospheric scientist. He was the project scientist for the polar mission, and he was just his family used to refer to me as Bob's work daughter. So you know how people have work husbands and work wives. Well, I was a work daughter, and he just nurtured me and gave me every single opportunity, and didn't have the big ego, would stand back and say, "Oh, you did this, you should talk to the press, or you should do whatever, and you should lead this meeting." The other one at Goddard that was really important for me was Mario Acuna, who just believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And he had a very, very different style of mentorship. He wasn't so much of a nurture, he was more of a push you into things, like, "Oh, pull yourself together. Of course you can do that. Don't be silly. Why are you whining? Go on, go do it." And it was a different style, but it was very, very effective. And again, when these people are introducing you at conferences, and Mario will say, "Hey, this is my brilliant postdoc," people just hear him saying it and believe it about you, even if it may not be true. And then I went up to the applied physics lab, and the big mentor there for me, well, Tom Cremegis is, I swear to God, he's like a mentor to everybody. But
he's here, he's listening.
Oh God, I love you, Tom. But he was another person that really, gave you that feeling that you could do it, and he was behind you. And even if he had to give you some advice on the quiet, he would do it to make sure you were always successful. And the other one was Barry Mock, who gave me two really important lessons about being a project scientist, which was, one, work harder than anyone else, and two, know more about the mission than anyone else does. And so you just need to know more about every single piece of the mission. You don't have to go deep into everything, but you need to know about everything so that when problems happen, you can effectively deal with them. And also I will flag another thing that he did. I actually made a mistake. I went to a meeting, and it was a bit of imposter syndrome, but I went to a meeting with the engineers, and they asked me a direct question, and it was a yes, no answer. And I didn't know, and I guessed, and I picked the wrong one. And I thought, I went back and I told Barry, and he did this, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, that's terrible." And I thought, "Oh God, that's it. I'm fired. At the very least, I'm not going to be a project scientist anymore. He'll somehow move me to one side." What he actually did was he sent an email to everybody that was at the meeting. And he said, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I sent Nikki to this meeting today. I gave her totally the wrong information. So she came back. Fortunately, she told me we've had the discussion. So moving forward, the answer is yes, and we'll move forward to do that. And I was floored, and I went in and I said to him, why would you do that? And he said, because you need to have the confidence to go back in and deal with those engineers again. And if I need you to be confident to go do it, I don't care. I've been in the field for 40 years. People can think what they like of me, but you need to be able to walk back into that meeting next week with your pride intact. And I did. And, you know, it was a very, very, very good experience. So I will also just say that a role model, not a mentor because I didn't know her, but a real role model to me was Margie. And Margie mentioned that she spent time at Imperial College. And so she had very close relationships with a number of people at Imperial College who I worked with, like Dave Southwood, Michelle Doherty, people that I really respected and admired. And they said such amazing things about Margie. But, you know, she was like a myth of a person to me. And I used to hear about how she could turn around in a lecture theater and throw a piece of chalk accurately and hit a student if they weren't paying attention. And just the reverence that that they you know, the way they spoke about Margie just really inspired me that, hey, you know, this is really look, this woman is kick ass and she's out there doing this all the time. And look at these giants to me who totally respect her. So Margie was definitely a role model. I didn't meet her until much later in my career. And then one other thing I'll flag, because it's just is, you know, I love working in teams. It's the thing that brings me the most joy is working in diverse teams and bringing teams together. And something that, you know, you need to learn early is to rely on your team and to know that they've got you and they will support you. And that was it was very prominent for me when my husband died. And so he died very suddenly. My son was 3.5, my daughter had just turned 1. And my entire life fell apart and I barely left the house for months. And my team put me back together. My Parker Solar Probe team and my Van Allen Probes team are and actually my APL family in total. They were there for me all the time. Even things like, you know, picking up my kids from daycare because I had to work late, or doing, instead of going out for a happy hour, having something at someone's house so I could bring my kids and they would take care of them. And just all the things that you have to cope with in life. And yet it was my APL family and the Parker and Van Allen teams that were so instrumental in doing that and actually believing that I could continue to do these roles and that I could be successful even though my life had effectively disintegrated in a second. And so I didn't cover all of these things, but I think that those are kind of some of the remarks I wanted to make.
Wonderful, Nikki. Wonderful, Margie. Wonderful, Nikki. I just wanted a quick anecdote, and then I will open to some of my questions that Margie answered a lot of them, but I still have some, and for you, Nikki, as well. And then we will open for any questions from the audience. My little anecdote that I also came to space physics, actually my second postdoc. I had done my PhD in plasma physics in cosmology, and then went to a postdoc in plasma physics at UCLA and only discovered space physics, like Margie tell the story. Yeah, I was standing in EGO trying to read the book to know what space physics is all about. But my imposter syndrome came, or a role model came in one meeting that I had very aggressive colleagues screaming. And I thought to myself, there's no way I will be able to debate physics like that. And I had George Gleckler near me, and he's so gentle. And he just sitting there so nervous before one of his talks. And I'm asking him, why are you so nervous? And you know, he's so famous, National Academy, etc. And he said, I always get nervous before every talk, doesn't matter what it is. But the fact that we started talking about an emotional aspect made me realize it's fine if I'm feeling nervous, or, you know. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to ask some more questions for Nikki maybe and Margie. How did you dealt with the imposter syndrome? And let's start with my final. And I know tricks that I use, or I used, to deal with that. But I would like to hear from you guys.
Go ahead, Margie.
Nikki, you go ahead.
All right. So it's funny, I shared this with you, Marav, right before this started, but I really hadn't come across the term imposter syndrome until maybe 2 years ago. And I was giving a podcast, and I was just describing, this feeling of like, I really wasn't good enough to be doing things. And they said, the interviewer said, oh, so, you're familiar with imposter syndrome. And it was almost like the moment it had a name and it was a real thing and other people had it, I started to feel better about it. So that was quite an amazing thing. But a lot of the time I dealt with it by either keeping really quiet and pushing myself into the background and hoping that no one asked me a question. And then it was really really with the help of Mario Acuna that I started to turn away a little bit more from it, because he just really did a lot for building confidence and showing faith in you. And so really relying on mentors and also getting comfortable with not knowing something and it being okay to not know something. And so I mean, I've been at NASA headquarters now for just over 2 years, and I still don't know a lot of what goes on there, because there's like NASA speak, and anyone who's worked at NASA knows what that means. There's NASA speak, and if you don't speak it, and so I'm learning, but there are still, and so but you learn to lean on people. So Paul Hertz, who is the division director for astrophysics, he is like my rock. And I used to sit next to him, and the late Mike Freilich, who's Earth Science, was also, they would sit next to me at meetings when I first started at headquarters, and like either they'd nudge me and say, you need to ask a question, you need to like put your voice into this conversation, you can't sit there terrified the whole time through. And they would, and even like Mike would say, you might want to ask about this. And so I would take part in the discussion. And even now, when I don't know what things stand for, acronym soup and processes and things, I will, even in COVID, when we're all working from home, I will text Paul Hertz and say, what does this mean? And he texts me straight back. And then so it's the learning, I think, the learning to lean on people and learning that it's really fine to not know everything, and nobody knows everything. And if they do, they probably don't have any friends. I'm just kidding. But if they, I mean, no one really knows everything. And so, Margie had a really good comment in her presentation, but, that you just need to be comfortable and know that you can lean on people.
Margie.
Okay, well, I think Nikki has really covered the field very well, but I can tell you that you may have noticed that I'm a very positive person. I like to look at the good side, and I've lived in that fear of acronym soup, which is really one of the tremendous challenges when you take on anything new related to NASA, because they're not only acronyms, but they're acronyms for each project. So the remark I might add is that I think it's something that I can almost welcome, that I still feel the imposter syndrome, because it means that I'm still doing new things where I'm not comfortable. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm now the team leader for the Europa Clipper magnetometer, and I assure you that there's an awful lot going on in that project that I don't understand, and that gives me sort of the need to take 2 deep breaths and remember that I can ask my colleagues for to explain things to me, but I'm still going into new directions, and I think that that's a good thing. And if it comes along with imposter syndrome, so be it.
True.
I wanted to ask a quick last question and then open for the audience. That it's not in the list that I sent you, because you basically cover a lot of what I had asked. But it's somewhat related to one of my questions that I sent, that is related with cultural. And I see my friend Adriana in the Zoom, you know, moving from different countries, from Brazil, that is much gentler, to US, and from Israel, it's not so gentle, but my ear is very tuned to different cultures, different languages, how you express yourself. And I remember entering into physics. My sister is also a physicist, and we both came back to my dad, that is a physicist, and asked him, why you never told us? There are no other women there, and everybody's so aggressive. And he said, oh, well, I haven't thought on telling you that. He didn't even occur to him that this might be a problem. So my question for you is, I know the tricks I used, and this is part of the last question I asked, if you have other hobbies, if you ever thought on leaving. Every time I felt I wanted to leave because it was just too aggressive, too hard, you know, whatever my colleagues were too alpha anything, just I couldn't even sit and think about the question. I remember the passion for the science, the passion for the physics. I love art. So I remember other artists that are, you know, that inspire me and remind me that I want to do something really, truly inspiring. And this held me together. But I wonder for you, how did you dealt in different environments? And I think especially for female scientists or for men that are gentler, the science, how it's done, it's in a more aggressive fashion, if you want to generalize. And not all scientists are like that. Those are the ones thoughtful and slower and slow thinking, but every community has more aggressiveness as well. And how did you deal with that? And tools you used to overcome it?
So it's an interesting thing. I don't think I didn't ever really, I was never part of a heated discussion. I never felt that I couldn't put my own opinion in. Or at least not when I really started on my career. I mean, as I said, when I was dealing with a lot, I just kept really quiet and sort of hid. But I think that there are differences in England and America for sure. But moving into working at NASA and working at APL, there's so much positivity and so much joy in doing science that I think, you know, I focus on that more. There were certainly people that I would try, you know, you try and avoid because they might not be the nicest person to debate with. But often you can just avoid debating with them. Now, if it's your science and you're going to go one-on-one, I mean, I did once have somebody, I was showing data at a conference and somebody raised their hand and said, well, that data doesn't agree with my model. And I said, well, you'll have to take that up with God because it's data, sorry. So, you know, and I did, and I actually said that in the conference. And then the moment I did it, I was like, oh, can't believe I said that, but I kept going. But it was just, you know, and sometimes you can humor is a big way to defeat
right. That is
situations. And so if you can make, you know, often if you can make somebody laugh, they you know,
you disarm them, right?
And so, yeah, you really disarm them, or you know, just make an off-topic remark. And you know, I've actually disarmed somebody before by just asking how their wife was doing after their back surgery, and they were so surprised that I even knew that.
Like,
oh, well, that was so nice of you to ask. That was great. And so you just disarm them, and then they've forgotten that they didn't like the data you just presented. So, I mean, there are a couple of ways of dealing with it. I'm a pretty forceful person anyway, so I've only become that later in life, but I don't usually have to deal with it too often.
Yeah. Margie, you have something?
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm not very confrontational, so I tend to quiet down when I run into conflict. I'm not an aggressive, immediate responder, but I usually find that when I'm in strong disagreement with colleagues, I'm supported by more people than people who agree with somebody who's raising the conflict. I don't think it's very useful to have public battles, so I tend to keep quiet.
That is a great comment.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, I see some questions in the chat. And I have one question here from Crisel Suarez. I'm starting from the bottom going up, of thanking you for the wonderful discussion and how you approached your male mentors. How did you ask them to become your mentor? I will even broaden it to not just male, female, anybody mentor.
Yeah. Well, I you know, when I was an undergraduate, the field of quantum electrodynamics was the forefront of science, and I wanted very much to work with the best guy in the field, and it never occurred to me what a privilege it was to be able even to ask to be a student. But I just asked Julian Schwinger if I could become his mentee, his graduate student, and he said yes. So it was just having, I wouldn't say it was having the courage to ask him. I think it was having the ignorance to think that he would say yes.
Yeah. Just my comments about that. It's happened to me, especially coming from different countries and coming from different fields. I didn't have mentors that people knew. I just picked up the phone. I remember wanting to talk to Ed Stone. I just picked up the phone and said, "Can I come to your office and talk to you?" And we talked for half an hour and said, "Sure, come." And was that, if this just similar to your market, just thinking, let's ask, see what happened. I have a question from Avital Kile about if you have a specific goal for your career, what is a path to choosing exactly what you will work on, and or just hope to be invited to a position, or there is more or less on one single path up the ladder to choosing your own research? I think it's, I guess, if I understand Avital, you can ask directly. It's about choosing your career path, right?
So I think Margie had a great comment in her presentation that really rang true for me, which is really don't choose, don't be open to all kinds of opportunities. And, you know, as young scientists, you know, you really do have a lot of options, and trying things and not being, you know, if it doesn't work out, you don't like it. I tried engineering, it didn't work out. Some of my best friends are engineers, and the thing I love most about being a project scientist was actually working with the engineers and doing the kind of, you know, the give and take with the mission design. But I mean, if you really know you absolutely want to work in something, then it's, you can certainly take steps, and people can tell you, you can go talk to somebody who's in that and say, how did you get here, and what, you know, what do you recommend? But I would say for young scientists, just be open to all kinds of different opportunities. You know, I've now worked in every single part of heliophysics, having worked all the way from the sun, and then with IMAP in the outer reaches of the heliosphere. And I didn't start off to work on any of that. And I really didn't. And in fact, Imposter Syndrome, when I became the project scientist for Solar Probe, I didn't know anything about the mission, or didn't really know much about turbulence. Sorry, Bill Matthews. I didn't know much about turbulence in the inner heliosphere. I do now, because Bill Matthews is one of my best friends. So I know all about turbulence now, but I didn't. And Bill helped me. Bill helped me. But I just think there are so many opportunities and so many things, so many different career paths, that I would really, you know, just take all of the opportunities, and you'll excel at what you're naturally best at, because or you'll excel at what you enjoy because that's what you really put the work into.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, my career
Yeah.
was a Brownian motion. Let's see, do I have another? Let's open, if somebody want to ask that is not in the chat. I see a lot of congratulations for the great presentation, but if there is a burning question, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand. I'm just going to see if I have so many people, so it's better that you unmute and ask directly. I have a question. If nobody has a question, I have many more questions. I hear from you, Marky, that from your presentation that as a mom, you worked part-time, and this is one. I was married and then divorced with the son, and I found juggling was really hard. It's again, it's an opportunity. It's a challenge and opportunity. It's made me focus much more in what I need to accomplish much quicker. But it's a challenge, and I found in academia still a challenge. In order, I sent these questions to another academic professor, and she said the same thing. To schedule seminars on times when you have to pick up your son or anything from that sort. If you want to comment on that or how you dealt with that. You said you and Nikki the same thing. You said that APL step in for the parenting.
Yes.
That I found, finding the babysitter or whatever to travel to conferences. I found this really, really challenging.
Well, I can't disagree. It certainly, being a mom is a challenge. The advice that I like to give to young women is be very careful in choosing your husband, because he's going to be the father of your children, and get somebody who's going to share parenthood with you. And I was very lucky on that. And I think that's really critical. I mean, I don't know how single parents manage. It's a very difficult path to try to advance a career, and particularly to go to meetings, as you say. But I was, so to begin with, I made an excellent choice in the father of my children. And he was wonderful. He was very supportive of them and of me. And then, we were fortunate to be in a position where we could pay for babysitters when all else failed. So I think that we regarded paying a babysitter a very high priority use of our resources. I think some people think that's either bad for the children. I don't think they really mind it at all. Some people think that
I had the same thought. Yeah, because my son at the end knows I'm interested and passionate. I could be a better mom if I'm working as well. So it's choices you make, but yeah. There is no. We had a question that I skipped that Rachel reminded me that you touched already, but maybe if you want to enter in more details, how to combat negative thinking. I'm also a positive person. I don't have much of negative thinking, but I don't know if you want to comment about it.
I have a lot of negative thinking. I've got to say, well, I do spend bouts of time thinking, am I doing the right thing? And I've struggled a lot with the mix with being a parent, particularly as a single parent, that was not planned to be a single parent. And there were times where I've just really got depressed over thinking, I'm not working hard enough, and I'm not spending enough time with my kids. I'm failing on all fronts, and it's really hard to deal with that. And the only way I found to be able to kind of get through that is to try and step back and look at the successes. And instead of thinking, oh, I didn't get that email done, I didn't get that presentation finished, and I didn't do this, try and actually focus on, well, this is what I did do this week, you know, and then, you know, make sure to spend the time with the kids. And right now it's really, as I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with, a virtual school on top of virtual work. And so it's like, you know, and my kids are older and they're tech savvy, so I don't get many times where they come in and say, you know, can you help me with this? They're pretty good at doing that. So they're 11 and 13, and they're pretty good with that. But it's that extra pressure, and also with my son, making sure he's actually doing his schoolwork and not playing video games. Unfortunately for him,
I know that problem.
He's in the room next to me, which means I can hear him. And so sometimes I have to get up from a meeting and say, I'll be right back. And I go and yell at my son, and then I come back down.
And when you get back, he's laying on his bed sleeping. I have a lot of that.
Yeah, I know. Suddenly he's tired all the time. Who knew? But there are things that I just try and focus on some of the positives and not feel like I've made, you know, like I've made mistakes, or I've made this, or I've done this. I do, if I make a mistake at work, I dwell on it, and I lie awake at night and I think about it, and then, you know, it really kind of weighs me down. But I do try and focus on the positive. And every now and again, out of the blue, my son in particular will tell me, I'm really proud of you, Mom. And it's like, okay, that's good. I'm good for a year now with that one sentence.
It's great to have a son. He does say the same. I love it. I see a hand raised by Maurice Wilson. Want to ask you a question? I unmuted you. I don't. Okay, anybody else have any question? We are more than an hour into it. So Maurice?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there was a plug. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate all of the positive reinforcement, basically from the perspective of work-life balance, whether it be parenthood, whether it be combating imposter syndrome that a lot of us feel in this profession. So with respect to those aspects of academia or just science, trying to rise in the academic ladder, trying to get tenure, or trying to become the next director of the heliophysics division or astrophysics division, whomever. As you're, you know, going through these issues and those issues involving a work-life balance, how do you handle the pressure to look good and not make mistakes from the perspective of letters of recommendation, from the perspective of trying to get that promotion or get a new, or get tenure? So, and basically the summary is, if you're working on your life, then you're not as much, the thought is that you're not as much working on your work. You know, a lot of people feel like mothers who take care of their children prioritize that, aren't as serious about science. That's, you know, a common thought. And then on the other side of it, there's also just, if you as a scientist, especially as a woman scientist, make mistakes in public or whatever in the workplace, then you might not look as good with your supervisor, advisor, or whomever will write a letter of recommendation for you. So how do you all tend to handle that, the balance of looking good, but at the same time still being human?
You make it sound as if being human never looks good, but that's I don't think that's really the case. I don't think that's really what you meant. But you know, I think if you spend your life thinking about how you're going to look in a letter of recommendation, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You want to focus on doing your work and communicating it. Communication is probably just as important as doing good work. You have to be sure that your colleagues and your advisors or whoever it is who's writing these letters of recommendation knows that these people know what you're doing. It's very hard to write a letter of recommendation for somebody whose work you've never read or listened to, or so make sure that the people who are going to matter in helping you along actually know what you're working on.
It's wonderful, wonderful advice.
Yeah, and I think, you know, everybody makes mistakes, and, you know, I certainly stress over the mistakes I make, but in the end, you can't let it paralyze you. So you can't be so frightened of making a mistake that you just don't do anything. And people understand, most of the time people understand mistakes happen. The looking good and the image thing is not as important, as Margie said, as just doing a good job and communicating that you're doing a good job. Because if you don't tell people you're doing a good job, and I don't mean go around saying, oh, I'm so smart, but just telling people what you're doing, going to conferences, presenting your work, showing the really good stuff that you do, it speaks volumes. And if somebody comes to your AGU talk or walks past your poster and you give a really good presentation and you make an impact on them with your presentation, they're not going to come back and say, oh, are you married? Do you have children? How many hours do you spend with your family? No, they just heard the great talk you did at AGU, and that's what they'll focus on. So, and definitely you shouldn't approach life worrying about a letter of recommendation, because you'll get a job more based on your ability to communicate your good work than any letter of recommendation will ever do for you.
Right, I agree. Okay, folks, thank you so much. I just want to finish by advertising our next wonderful webinar. Hopefully you will come and join us with Tom and Parisa speaking about coming from far away lands, how different backgrounds shape their careers. And if you listen to that and want to be, if my cat will stop walking on my keyboard, would be great. If you want to be part of the outreach of SHIELD, especially the testimonials that is so dear to our hearts, and you can email me, Upa, or ShieldOutreach@gmail.com. You can just to record one of them. I can give you the questions that we asked, or you can just go there and listen. They're amazing, amazing testimonials. I was blown away. When I started listening, I was like, they're so candid, so open. I was very inspired by hearing these young voices talking about their struggles. So anyway, thank you so much, Nikki and Margie. It was a delight. I felt like I was having coffee with you too.
Very nice. Thank you for organizing it.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. It was really nice to chat with everyone today. Thanks.
Yes. Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.